the Russian observers. Çavuşoğlu states that they are considering sending Turkish troops. Does Turkey have this right, and how should we consider these steps, especially given that the statement of Russia, Azerbaijan and Armenia has no mention of Turkey whatsoever? The mobility of Turkish observers is limited to the coordinates that will be set up upon the agreement on the monitoring center of Russia and Turkey. It will be located in Azerbaijan, in the territory that will not be close to Karabakh, and it will be additionally coordinated in order to establish the joint monitoring center. Yesterday, the relevant memorandum was signed at the level of defense ministers of Russia and Turkey. It will be a remote center, and it will use UAVs and other technologies that allow us to monitor the situation on the ground in Nagorno Karabakh, first and foremost in the line of contact, and it will allow us to determine what side abides by the arrangements and which of the sides violates the ceasefire. So the mobility of Turkish observers will be confined and limited to the area of Azerbaijan. It will not be the territory of former conflict, and there will be Turkish and Russian observers. As for the statement in Parliament, I took a look at the statement of the Minister of Defense about Turkey playing the same role as Russia. Well, we are talking solely about the center that will have no in-the-field missions, and it will have its headquarters sense. Both Russian and Turkish experts will have the same mandate, and there will be no peacekeeping units of Turkey in Nagorno-Karabakh. And this was clearly stipulated in the statement of leaders that you've mentioned. Probably there are a lot of those who wish to be engaged in the process and were astonished by some of the assessments that we hear. Well, basically, there are a lot of speculations in many countries of the globe, but still we should be guided by what's been put on paper, and it has been the result of very intensive negotiations that were held a week before the declaration of ceasefire. Colleagues, since Nagorno-Karabakh is on top of our agenda, we did our utmost to engage our colleagues from Azerbaijan and Armenia. And now I give the floor to the representative of the Azerbaijani news channel, Arman Gadzhiev. You have the floor. I beg your pardon. Sorry, we can't hear anything. Maybe you should do something with that. Maybe put mic a little bit further. Or maybe you can slow down and give less passion to your question. Can you hear me? Well, let us try once again, but a little bit slower. Okay. Thanks a lot. Mr. Minister, since yesterday, Armenia has witnessed calls to demolish an agreement reached between Azerbaijan, Armenia and Russia, which can be called a provocation that is fraught with hostilities. At the same time, some experts try to present Russian peacekeepers as some kind of a shield. What's your take on these statements? Are they dangerous, and what are the possible repercussions? You know, the current stage of the conflict basically unfolded after we've seen piling aggressive, confrontational statements for quite some time. We want the conflict to be settled a long time ago based on the principles that were elaborated by the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs. By the way, the president of Azerbaijan has spoken about it more than once lately, and he highlighted his commitment to the recommendations of co-chairs. Should we have followed this path, the result would be the same, virtually the same, with regard to liberation of 5 areas and later on 2 additional districts. But there would be no bloodshed in this case, and it would be linked to the political settlement. But at this stage, given that these peaceful agreements and political and diplomatic steps that were agreed upon and shared at some point in time, since these agreements were challenged and it was said that they would not ensure credible security if we follow this path of releasing 5 and 2 districts. So we saw quite harsh and aggressive statements that were piling up. So the tensions run high, and there were incidents on the Azeri-Armenian border. They were appeased, but the desire to have a solution was something in the air. And the efforts taken by co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk Group that launched the relevant calls, and later on at the level of foreign ministers of Russia, Azerbaijan and Armenia, that made the relevant statements, and later on they were corroborated in the new documents sponsored by France and Germany as our co-chairs of the Minsk Group. So nothing was successful and nothing played well in terms of the ceasefire, because there was no control and monitoring mechanism for the ceasefire, and brand new quality to these arrangements was given after presidents of Armenia, Azerbaijan and presidents of Russia had talks. They had intensive contacts for a week. They had several telephone conversations per day, and their main focus was to negotiate a peacekeeping operation. And finally, it has been coordinated, it has been negotiated, and the makeup of this peacekeeping operation was determined by Russia upon the request of Azerbaijan and Armenia. It is currently being deployed, and it ensures the Lachin corridor to have a connection between Armenia and Nagorno Karabakh. Indeed, we see protests in Yerevan. We see how the opposition tries to capitalize on this situation. There are sincere people, indeed, that are really sorry about this outcome at this stage. But let me highlight that the illusions about 7 districts remaining in the status quo, as it was the case a month ago or a month and a half ago, there should be no such illusions whatsoever. And I believe that local authorities should have raised awareness among the local population that the settlement had to be made in line with the principles that had been put in paper and had been tabled a long time ago. They paid a perfect path for the settlement without any bloodshed, without violating security of anyone in the region. I'm talking about Nagorno Karabakh Armenians and other ethnicities living there, and certainly unblocking of all communications. I mean, talking about transport, economic communications. It should play a positive, vital role in reviving the region, in reviving the Armenian economy that suffered more than anybody else because of the breaking of ties economic ties with Azerbaijan and Turkey. And now, in line with the current arrangements, all these ties will be restored, and the economy will have a respite. There will be transport links with partners from Armenia. So, if we abide by our agreements, and so far I do not see any signs that anybody tries to violate these agreements, so everybody will benefit, and it will be a win-win situation. We have contacts with our colleagues. President Putin talked with Mr. Pashinyan, and I also talked with Foreign Minister of Armenia today. I'm convinced that the Armenian government understands full well its responsibility. It signed up to these agreements guided by the lofty interests of its people, and I believe that the integrity of this agreement will be ensured and it will be observed. At least I see numerous political forces in Armenia that understand what is going on and draw right conclusions. And now let's turn from Azerbaijan to Armenia, representative of the Armenian public television. Sorry, you haven't turned on the mic. Do you hear me? Yes. Mr. Minister, I have a question on paragraph 4 and 9 on the agreement. That the agreement will be automatically extended for another 5 years. The presence of Russian peacekeepers, is it a temporary measure or not? So, well, you have quoted the paragraphs that have an answer to your question. The time frame is 5 years, and it can be extended to extra 5 years if 6 months before the end of the agreement any party does not express its desire to terminate the agreement. I believe that this is a reasonable wording, and it provides for the relevant time frame for the situation to calm down and to set about some creative spirit in the region. And there's a lot that needs to be created in the region in terms of observing the right of ethnic and religious groups that live there. All the refugees and IDPs have the right to go back to Karabakh to restore their cultural, civilizational and religious roots. The situation around shrines, mosques, churches has to be considered. Many of these shrines are being destroyed, and I'm also talking about other religious shrines in the region. For instance, Armenia has long raised the issue of shrines in Hichivan. And I believe that now that we've reached a peaceful agreement after the end of hostilities, the issues of cultural heritage of Armenia, of Azerbaijan, of other ethnicities living in these countries should be our focus. Probably this will be one of our most important steps that would help restore international peace and accord. We had to do a lot so that the cultural heritage of Armenians and of Azeris related to Nagorno Karabakh quite closely and historical, for this legacy, for this heritage to be a unifying ground for the future steps. And I do hope that these 5 years of Russian peacekeeping operation will allow us to lay solid foundation for future progress on this track. And as for the future steps after the end of this 5-year period, I would not jump to conclusions. We believe that the mandate could be terminated. We made this reservation, but let us not make any forecasts right now. Let us support Russian peacekeepers in their very complicated mandate and very important mandate indeed, to restore normal, peaceful life in Nagorno Karabakh throughout the whole territory. And let's go back to Moscow. Kommersant newspaper, Yelena Chernenko. Thanks a lot. Do you hear me well? Mr. Minister, thanks a lot for this press conference. I have a question on the US and the prospects of the New START treaty. So what's the point in having negotiations on extending this treaty with the outgoing Trump administration that gave us a year and launched some preconditions if Joe Biden, president-elect, apparently gives us 5 years without preconditions? To be honest, I do not quite get your question. The question, what's the point in doing something, means that we're interested in this. We have shown our interest, and once we have done it, we said that we have tabled a proposal that we need no less than the Americans and no more than the Americans. I'm reading some comments from Washington, from the officials of the outgoing administration, well, at least from the Trump administration. Anyways, even if the Republicans win the election, there will be a new team. So we hear some comments that Russia has little time to decide whether it is going to sign this agreement with Trump or if it wants to save it for Joe Biden. But you know, this is just wishful thinking, and these are talks that are guided by the winner or loser logic. But it's not within our interest. We want to have a win-win situation. If we're talking about the New START treaty, everybody would win if there will be no preconditions for the extension of the treaty. That's what we have proposed. We proposed that a year ago, but the US tried to see a sign of weakness. They said that we're willing to extend it at all costs. They launched some unacceptable preconditions, and they said that they are ready to extend it, but we need to count all the warheads and put a cap on them. We need to count the categories of all these warheads and how to ensure verification at the facilities that produce these warheads. We've already witnessed a situation when the US inspectors were checking the portals of the facilities, and you know that this will never happen again. After that, they said that they were ready to extend the treaty, but besides providing all the warheads to us and besides providing access of our inspectors to your facilities, you also need to dismantle some of your missiles. I'm talking about Skyfall and Canyon. Well, I don't see, and I don't understand whether they are more interested in a genuine strategic dialogue to ensure security of their country and their allies and humanity on the whole, or whether it's more about propaganda, PR action, and to show that they're tough, cool guys. I believe that now, when we see this huss and fuss in the US with regard to ongoing counting of votes and lawsuits, I believe that neither the Trump administration nor the future Biden team could give us some reasonable and realistic proposals, that would not be opportunistic and driven by some US domestic affairs. So we need to calm down. President Putin has already stated that we need this treaty no more than the Americans. We wanted to extend it. We put our proposal on the table, and if they do not wish to extend it, well, we'll live without this treaty. And it has been once again confirmed by a series of meetings President Putin had with the military and representatives of the military and industrial facilities in Sochi.
So now we can continue the topic of Russian-American relations with our colleagues from the United States. Nathan Hoch from CNN, please, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Mr. Lavrov. As you know, Secretary of State Pompeo has also had meetings that did not bring any result. Do you think that Washington could play a constructive role in this process of settling the conflict? And do you expect some changes in the foreign policy of Biden administration in this regard? Well, you said that Mr. Pompeo had a meeting that did not bring any result. I would not say that this meeting did not bring any result, because since the beginning of the hostilities, there were some efforts from co-chairs at the highest level when they issued a declaration of the presence of the United States, Russia, and France, with the call to stop the hostilities and to begin the political settlements on the basis of the achievements by co-chairs over the last years. This declaration hasn't worked. It was not heeded by, but then there was a declaration of Foreign Minister of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia that we published and made in Moscow, where we called for the stop of hostilities and the commitment of Armenia and Azerbaijan to stop the hostilities and to create the mechanisms of control, which was not stipulated in the in this declaration. It didn't bring any results. Then there was an initiative of French president, and in an online format they coordinated the declaration to support what has been done before. And then there was this initiative in Washington with the invitation of foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yes, this didn't work, but all of this created this necessary basis and the initiative of co-chairs, whose role we continue to underline, and I'll say a couple of words about this. All of this created necessary preconditions in order that led us, over the last days before the 10th of November, at the levels of the presidents of Russia and Azerbaijan and Prime Minister of Armenia, to transform this will of international community that was stipulated in many declarations of co-chairs, to transform it into reality, put into practice. I had a telephone conversation with my French colleague just yesterday, and members of our ministry also talked to our American partners, and they, of course, they were somehow sorry that they didn't have any information about this, but we have always underlined, and publicly Mr. Putin has said this, that we are working on ceasefire in accordance with the position ruled out by co-chairs. Second, as for more detailed information, the negotiations on preparing the Moscow Declaration from 9th of November that we are talking about took place over 2 days. Well, I mean, literally 24 hours per day. There were several telephone calls at a day. So if there is a desire to have some information expressed by the invitation to brief our American and French partners, well, that was just impossible, literally. And I'm convinced that these explications that we gave, those clarifications, were received in a correct way. And I saw this yesterday when I talked to my French colleague, and in the UN Security Council we proposed to welcome these agreements on the ceasefire, underlining and emphasizing that they are corresponding with the initiatives of the co-chairs. We don't want to distance ourselves from our American and French colleagues, and we invited them to visit Moscow. I guess they will be here in a couple of days in order to have a detailed conversation about how can they make their contribution to the realization of these agreements. And I would like to underline that it is also more important in what I've already mentioned in establishing the peaceful life in Nagorno Karabakh, peaceful coexistence of ethnic and religious groups, renaissance of shrines and cultural facilities, their functioning, secure functioning, and respectful one. Here we see the huge role of the co-chairs, along with the UN system organizations like UNESCO, first and foremost. And we already have these such preliminary talks with our colleagues from other UN specialized agencies like the UNHCR and ICRC. This is a not UN structure, but still it works really closely with all the countries in resolving humanitarian issues. By the way, ICRC has a mandate in Armenia and in Azerbaijan and in Nagorno-Karabakh over many years. We talked to the representatives of the leaders of the ICRC in Geneva, and we expect the president of the ICRC to visit Moscow next week. We'll discuss how in this new situation the ICRC would be able to renew its work in order to assist the process of exchange of deceased and hostages and other detainees. So the role of the co-chairs is still really important, and this was fully confirmed by Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, with whom I had a telephone conversation yesterday. I talked to Armenia. Yesterday I talked to the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan, who also confirmed their interest in continue working together with the co-chairs. And there was also a second part of the question about the American foreign policy. Oh, really? I missed it. What was that? Nathan, please. Yes, do you expect some changes in Biden administration foreign policy? Not only about Karabakh issue, but just in general. Well, you know, of course, diplomats should make some forecasts about some situations and issues, or predict some changes in their partners' approaches in international relations. But I guess that now it's not a good thing to make some forecasts about the future. Of course, we closely follow what happens in the United States. This is a major country and a powerful country, and many things depend on them, although not everything. But we can only follow the statements that they make and the names that they say that will be potential new participants of the processes in the United States related to their foreign policy. Well, and the Trump administration also says those names, and Joseph Biden does the same, speaking about the people whom he would like to see in his team. As for first announcements, as I would put it, about the possible foreign policy in the case of the inauguration of Joseph Biden, it looks more correspondent to bases promoted by Obama administration, and it's quite natural, taking into account that Joseph Biden was vice president in Obama administration, for example, about the question of the climate issues, Paris Agreement, and Iran nuclear deal. Although here we have a lot of questions, even if Democrats would form the administration and would decide to go back to JCPOA, according to their statements, they would not do it. They would try to change this agreement for their benefit in order to make it more pressing towards Iran. I don't know if this initiative could have some prospects, but I just want to say a couple of words about the issues which we will be working on after they will finish their counting campaign. As for the work with the WTO, I hope that their approach will be even more constructive, that they will not block the work of the WTO, they will not try to undermine the WTO and try to substitute it with some bilateral agreements with different parts of the world, with their partners, agreements that would not be logic and will not be tied by any logic. Their only objective is to gain more benefits for the United States. And Europeans, of course, are waiting for more constructive approaches from the United States in the future. So we'll see. As for Russian track, our experts do not wait for some revolutionary changes. We see a great division in the United States, which was expressed by the voting during the elections, and of course responsible politicians should try to find some ways to overcome that division and try to promote some unifying ideas in order to make American people unite again. So that's the responsibility of two major political parties, and many observers are analyzing what can they have in common, those political powers, in order to so that they could finally unite. And among these common things, many experts place the attitude towards the Russian Federation. And over the last 4 years, from last months of the Obama administration, we've seen such an intensive Russophobia that this has already become the part of their political culture. Of course, we would not, it would be regretful if they will try to unite America on the basis of such Russophobia, but we'll see. Now I would like to give the floor back again to Russian journalists. TASS agency, please, you have the floor. Mr. Lavrov, question about Belarus. In this country we see the process, and we don't hear much about the constitutional reform, and it's difficult to evaluate the situation, taking into account that the foreign ministry didn't give accreditation of new type to those who requested it. Will Russian foreign ministry assist Russian journalists in this issue? Thank you. Well, of course we will assist our journalists. We will have the meeting of joint Commission of the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. We will take up this question on this session, but we're already working on this in working regime, and frankly speaking, I haven't heard that some of Russian journalists had some problems and troubles with this, but Madam Zakharova, of course, may have some information about this. She could provide me with this information. I will, of course, also do my part. I do not see any reasons in not giving Russian journalists their accreditations, and there are many journalists that wish to work in Belarus. And of course we are not speaking of those who are just implementing the task to destabilize the situation in Minsk and in other cities. We have these examples, and authorities of the Republic of Belarus are also speaking about this. Of course we are concerned by some processes and unrest, but we are satisfied that these protests are going down in numbers, and the number of participants of unauthorized protests is going down. Last Sunday there were several thousands, from 3,000 to 5,000. If we can just compare this number with numbers of earlier periods when more than 100,000 people went to the streets, but this decrease in street activities just demonstrates that there was a desire by the people to be heard, and these people do understand that they need to calm down the situation and go to the constructive dialogue, and they see some signals and messages from the authorities. They do have it at the table. I mean, the constitutional reform. I will say a couple of words about this later. But decreasing of number of participants of those process of the people who wanted a better life and dialogue with the authorities and they wanted to be heard, it is being compensated by the aggressive actions of those who are going on streets now. These people are of a different category, obviously. They just want to provoke law enforcement agencies for the use of force. We see these young men and we see some criminal elements among them with stones and with Molotov cocktails, and they apparently are aggressive. Of course, this is a provocation. It's an intent to stop this situation from going to a political settlement. This is what President Lukashenko calls for because he's promoting the initiative of the constitutional reform. It is being discussed actively now. I cannot say that there is a pause in it. There is a schedule, clear schedule, and the essence and the gist of this reform, the limitation of the presidential authority and the redistribution of a part of authority between the parliament, government, regional structures. They are now discussing the possibility of reforming the parliament, so in order to make it unicameral and that it being elected by mixed or proportional system, and it will be considered during the All Belarus Assembly. It would happen next month or in January, and after this draft constitution will be put on national referendum. We do support this process, and we think that all the members of the society should be involved in this process of working on this new constitution, working staff and youth organizations and NGOs, political parties. All of them, of course, should participate in this process. But unfortunately, the opposition that works from abroad, from Vilnius, from Warsaw now, this opposition has a different position. They don't want any dialogue, any constructive counter-program. Their only idea is just getting rid of Mr. Lukashenko, and they're just demanding new presidential election. Do they have any program? What's the program they will use in order to participate in these elections? Frankly speaking, I don't know. If we have a look at the mottos, they apparently want to go back to the period of their history when Belarus was not independent, when it was not independent republic. They have a nostalgia about the times when this country was part of other countries. Well, I guess that people of Belarus should define themselves, their fate. And how should they treat the fact that someone tries to define their fate? In Vilnius, there is a coordinational council. In Warsaw, there is a national anti-crisis office. They are being welcomed by European parliaments and parliamentary structures. I do not think that our Western colleagues do not understand what are they doing, and although on every corner they say that this is not an intent to change regime in Belarus or any attempt to drive the wedge between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus, but all these good statements are not based on their actions. Their position is being financed actively, and they just have this position, uncompromised position. They are demanding strikes, and those demands were failed. They failed, and they do many other things in order to support this confrontational situation in their country. The United States, Canada, European Union, as you know, have introduced personal sanctions against President and against the employees of his administration.
By the way, we have some information that we share with our colleagues from abroad. Not only are we talking about funding of protests, but these are protests that also have some forced provocations, but there are also money and instructions, guidelines coming from abroad. Instructions as to how to produce Molotov cocktails, some other improvised explosive devices, and many other things. So our position is quite simple. There is a need to stop meddling into domestic affairs of Belarus. There is a need to incentivize all people of Belarus to engage in the political settlement via the constitutional reform process, and the ideas of playing down the confrontational cards in Belarus are quite harmful. As you know, the OSCE has used the Moscow mechanism. It was established back in 1990, where there was a sense of euphoria who wanted to destroy the USSR. So the mechanism was used to draft a report remotely. And the European Parliament also analyzed this report. There was a resolution calling for help to the Belarus opposition and to shape some kind of a support fund that will be allocated to Belarus once the current regime is ousted. This is really regrettable. By the way, the United Nations Human Rights Council has a special procedure called a Universal Periodic Review on a country basis that analyzes the state of human rights in a particular country. And it so happened that a week ago it was Belarusian turn. It was drafted for 1 year and a half. So the outcome of this report is that the Belarus did a great job observing human rights. I'm not saying that the situation is perfect with human rights. It's not the case in every country of the world. But the situation is not black and white. It is much more complicated, and every reasonable politician wants to create conditions for the well-being of its people. And those who want to play geopolitical games, they will nurture opposition. They will invite this opposition to foreign bases where they will try to guide and govern their country from abroad. And I believe that this is a harmful experience even for those who try to patronize on Belarus. I believe that those countries understand that this is a futile attempt, but they just can't stop. And next question, RIA Novosti, Tatiana Kukushkina. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. If I may, I would like to go back to the US. In 2016, outgoing President Obama imposed another round of sanctions against Russia and expelled Russian diplomats. Does Moscow expect Trump to do the same once he leaves? And it will make prospects of rebuilding relations between Moscow and Washington null and void. And what can it be? Another round of sanctions, for instance, with regard to Nord Stream 2, or maybe some other sanctions that would impede future strategic dialogue and strategic arrangements. You know, the Trump administration probably does not need to wait for the end of their mandate to impose sanctions against Russia. Recently, we've quoted some statistic data. During Trump's tenure in office in Washington, 46 rounds of sanctions were imposed against Russia. These were both sectoral sanctions and sanctions against Russian individuals and legal entities. I believe that this is a breaking high record, and by far this is the record number. So why does he need to wait for the end of his tenure? I don't know. The Trump administration made no qualms about imposing such sanctions without any grounds and without any reasons. We understand that we need to count on ourselves. There is a term, import substitution. Sometimes it is interpreted in a narrow way, and sometimes it is chastised because an import item, an import good is hard to be substituted. Sometimes there are more convenient ways. Sometimes they just don't want to make something themselves. But this import substitution and substitution per se should be used in global terms, at global scale. And in our dialogue, in our contacts with the West, we don't want to guide our plans judging by the fact that the West will observe everything that we agreed upon. The West has shown that it is non-negotiable, and it is tempted to play some geopolitical games and to put politics way above economy, and neglecting the developments in Crimea after the coup d'etat in Ukraine, when Russian-speaking population and Russians refused to accept the coup d'etat, and this was the reason for Western sanctions. And the West just proved that it is not capable to prevent this coup d'etat, although it undermined and derailed the arrangement that was prepared by Europe. There were a plethora of examples where the West accused us in their failures. And we should get used to this. Now we see the Skripal case, the Navalny case, which is an outrage, a total outrage. I believe that our German and other Western partners are behaving inappropriately, and each and every time they see the slightest reason, they impose sanctions. And that is because our Western partners do not wish to abide by their commitments, be it the Ukrainian settlement. They failed their mission in 2014, be it an explanation that we request from them on Skripal case, on Navalny, and on many other accusations against us, and many other things. So we need to get used to this import substitution, not only when it comes to cheese, truffles, but when it comes to everything that has to do with safe, sound and credible development in all areas, on all tracks. Aligia, Anadolu News Agency, Moscow office, you have the floor. Thanks a lot, Mr. Minister. From the beginning of hostilities in Nagorno Karabakh, Turkey has played an active part in diplomatic initiatives to resolve the conflict. In your view, what is the Turkish contribution to implementing Azeri-Armenia agreements that put an end to violence in Nagorno Karabakh? You know, assessments have already been made in this regard. President Putin had a telephone conversation with President Erdogan, and it was more than once. And with regards to our efforts to ensure ceasefire and deployment of peacekeepers, as well as following the agreement, President Erdogan supported Russia, and as you know, I stated it at the beginning of our Q&A. We coordinated the establishment of the coordination center that will be placed in the Azeri territory, that will not be adjacent to the conflict area. It will allow us to monitor the developments on the ground remotely in Nagorno Karabakh. If need be, we could use our influence on sides to alleviate any concerns and any violations, but I hope that there will not be such case. And the territory that will host this coordination center is not related to the conflict area, and you should understand this full well. I hear various wishes, recommendations, but I believe that we should set them aside, and we need to go into business, and we're talking about the arrangements between Russia and Turkey and their work within the coordination center. You know, there have been a lot of assessments guided by either euphoria or hysteria. Russia lost Caucasus, and afterwards there will be Crimea on the way. There are a lot of such kind of analysts. Just like in Turkey, newspapers have various articles about the defeat and that Russia gained the upper hand, that Turkey tried to capitalize the Azeri assistance provided to Azerbaijan in a more efficient way, but now we see that Azerbaijan is winning on the battlefield, and Russia is winning in diplomatic terms. So I've heard these references. So the same wave of comments was made by our opposition, by our liberals. So this is not professional analytics, and we should not we shouldn't take it into account. We have a joke about the Armenian radio asking questions in the Soviet Union, and one of the questions was as follows: what is the difference between life and various parts of human body? And the answer was as follows: life is harsher. So deliberations as to who wins what and what can be gained further, it is guided by the logic of the zero-sum game. I defeated you, that means I'm a cool guy. So this is not what our politics is about. We want to see calm and peace near Russia, near our territory. Russia was interested in preserving the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh. That's what somebody said, but this is an outright lie. Russia wanted to advance the Nagorno Karabakh settlement, and a case in point is the Kazan document, that could achieve the same result we have now, but without any bloodshed. Unfortunately, this did not happen, and it was not our fault. After that, we promoted a two-track approach, and at first, all the sides were quite happy about that, but after that they launched some prerequisites as to the 2 and 5 districts, and later on it turned out to be a failure, and it was swept aside ad infinitum for some uncertain period. So we had a number of really good proposals, and we expressed our goodwill. Now we see some settlement. Indeed, there were some casualties, but we've reached a settlement promoted by Russia. And it is regrettable that the result that we've reached with bloodshed could be reached without it. Russia do not want to see frozen conflict in either Nagorno Karabakh or Transnistria or anywhere else in the post-Soviet space. And those who launch these assessments are acting not in goodwill. And I believe they don't have the necessary insight, and they don't wish to examine the Russian Federation analysis and our proposals, as well as steps that we've made. Our common goal with Turkey is to observe the ceasefire with remote equipment and remote methods. As for the peacekeeping operation, it's being maintained with the support exclusively of the Russian Federation, and our Turkish partners understand this full well. We will cooperate with them on other tracks of foreign policy, including Syria, first and foremost. Well, I hope that our Turkish colleagues will interpret well your sentence about your joke about human body. And now, next question. Let's get down to the U.S. And the counting campaign. Many world leaders have already congratulated Joe Biden on the victory. As far as I know, President Putin has not made a call. And is Russia concerned about U.S. election carried out with violations? And certainly, if these elections took place in some other part of the globe with such violations, the U.S. would have called this election illegitimate. So if you heard Pompeo's statement, then the Secretary of State did not recognize the U.S. election as legitimate. Pompeo asked for the end of the counting of votes. As for our approach, we have stated repeatedly that we respect the right of the U.S. people to shape their future. I believe that they have the most archaic election system that exists in all countries of the world. I've mentioned in my many friendly talks with my colleagues, predecessors of Mike Pompeo. I remember these talks with Condoleezza Rice when we discussed the outcome of election. She started saying something to me about claims against our election system and our elections, and I said that there was example in the U.S. when a president was elected in the U.S. who didn't get the majority of election votes, but because of the Electoral College, he won the race. And she said that it is the blunder of our system, but we know about it, and please have don't worry about it.
So we just want Americans not to worry about our problems that they say we have, and not to worry about the problems of other countries of similar nature. Every country has its own traditions. If Americans are ready to live with this tradition that distorts the will of the population, it's their right. If they're happy, if everything is okay with them, but as we see, it's not everything is okay. But if they are happy with this, we cannot give them any advice on this. It's up to them. As for the congratulations, well, I'm always surprised when people pay such an attention to these facts. Normally, congratulations are being sent after the official announcement of the electoral results. This hasn't happened yet in the United States. There is the Office of Services which is authorized to make such a statement. It's an official statement. They still have not done this. And all the congratulations that were sent, they are based on the accounts of CNN, ABC, social media, and, well, I mean, leading American media. Well, if it's in traditions of someone to send official congratulations on that basis, we cannot do anything about this. Our approach is different. And we see that congratulations are being sent even before the announcement of the official results, but it can be done when there are no disputes, when the other party could recognize the victory of their rival. It happened in 2016 when the victory of Trump was recognized. But now the situation is different, so we need to wait until the official announcement. And as I understand, in the United States there is a clear procedure of how this all should take place. On 14th of December there should be a session of Electoral College. This meeting will take place not in one hall, it will take place in the capital of each of the states. In some states, those members of Electoral College are abided by the necessity to vote for the candidate that obtained the majority of votes of this district. In other states, electors may write any surname of any candidate, and not necessarily the ones who ran in this specific region of the United States. And then on the 6th of January, the Congress of the United States will have a meeting where the members of the Electoral College will inform the Congress on the results of their work, and if there are some doubts, when approving the votes of members of Electoral College on every state, then the elections of the President and the Vice President will move to another dimension. The President will be elected by the Congress and not by individual votes of the members of the House of Representatives, but each state for that goal has only one vote, so there are only 50 votes. And how they will be distributed, it's a mystery still, we don't know this. So the distribution of the votes by states, I mean Republican states and Democratic states, it's not proportional with the majority in the House of Representatives. And the Vice President will be elected in the Senate. Now I'm speaking about the procedure that might take place if at the stage of the announcement by the members of the Electoral College and in Congress there will be no clear situation, but in any case the inauguration will take place on 20th of January. By that time we will have known something. As for the congratulations, and by the way, Russia, China and Mexico, for example, have not still sent their congratulations. The President of Mexico said that he will do this only after the official announcement of the results. So in this regard, I don't think it's really a good thing to search for some conspiracy theories. I guess this is just a normal practice. Those who deem acceptable sending some congratulations, well, it's their right. We know that in 2016 many European leaders sent their congratulations to candidate who lost, and then they revoked their congratulations. So here I don't see any reason for speculating on it too much. Interfax Agency, Margarita Velechova, please, you have the floor, madam. You should just turn your mic on. Done. Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Lavrov. It's a pleasure to see you again. Our question is about Libya. Is Russia ready, alongside with Turkey, to have common efforts in order to effectively realize the ceasefire agreement in Libya, in particular in the question of withdrawal of foreign fighters from Al-Jufu? And as what's the situation on the ground in Libya? How does it correspond to the elections there? And are they possible in some near future? Are they feasible? And Libyans are now producing more and more oil, and taking into account that we contributed to the process of deblocking of the oil sector. Are we worried about this process now? Thank you. Well, from the very beginning of the Libyan crisis, we should always remember its origin. It was the brutal aggression of NATO that bombed Libya and destroyed Libyan statehood, and this gave way to terrorists, to trafficking of drugs and arms, and illegal migrants, and Europe is now being suffocated of them. Despite the fact that this problem was not created by us, of course, we are interested in not letting it become a constant plague. That's why after the end of the NATO aggression, when Libya broke apart in several parts and there were doubts on whether it will be possible to make this country united, we began to work on creating the conditions to renew some kind of inter-Libyan dialogue. We worked with all of the political forces in Libya. We, at that time, were almost the only ones who did that, because other actors just have chosen their parts and became their patrons. For example, of Tripoli government or Tobruk and Benghazi with the Libyan National Army. Someone had contacts with smaller but still rather aggressive militant groups that controlled some territories, and they felt themselves really comfortably there. So the situation in Libya was really harsh. In 2015, this Hirata agreement was signed that stipulated some balance in the area after the NATO aggression, and the Tripoli government has been recognized as the national government, and the parliament became the House of Representatives that resided in Tobruk, and we've seen that such a harmonic scheme that the government is acting with the support of parliament. Unfortunately, this scheme was not long-lasting because of the contradictions between these two groups, and then we've seen the renewal of hostilities. There were some intentions to have conferences. For example, France held a conference several years ago, and they designated a specific concrete data of the all Libyan elections. A similar conference was held by Italy in Palermo. In United Arab Emirates there were some meetings. Well, all of these reminded some kind of attempts to look good when the situation was really harsh, because all of these calls for action did not have any basis. And over the last period, thanks to more active participation of Russia and Turkey, given the fact that our countries were had special ties, Turkey had special ties with the government of national unity in Tripoli, we had good ties with Tripoli and Tobruk and other actors in Libya. So we tried to make use of our influence in order to empower conflicting parties to look for some compromises. And the Berlin Conference was a major landmark, after which United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution, and we made a decisive contribution to the decision that it is necessary to invite to this conference Libyan parties themselves, because at the beginning Germans didn't want to do this. They just wanted to launch some internal event and to discuss among external actors some issues, and they didn't even want to invite the neighbors of Libya. But we insisted, on the invitation of Libyan parties, I mean Sarraj and Haftar, and also the neighbors of Libya. And Germans didn't want to do this, I'd like to remind you. And with the participation of Libyans and their neighbors, this conference, although ended up in the final document, there were still some doubts whether those documents may be perceived well on the ground. And just after the conference, special representative of the Secretary General of the UN, Ghassan Salameh, who is in charge of Libya, resigned. I guess he realized that trying to impose some external opinions is not a good thing to do. Well, now, without going further into details, now we have an approach that was promoted by Russia since the very beginning. For example, in Tunisia, with the support of the UN, the delegates united who were representatives of 3 regions of Libya: Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and Fissam. 25 persons from each of the regions. They had to develop a roadmap of a final political settlement in order to guarantee stable political organization of their country, preparation of constitution, creation of presidential council with equal representation of 3 Libyan regions, establishment of government, parliamentary elections. Well, this whole political process that is now being discussed, it's been scheduled for 1.5 and 2 years. We do hope that this work will be successful, and the most important thing, we want these results to be implemented and put in practice. And as for the oil, in September, we invited Libyan parties to Moscow in order to assist them in coordinating the agreement on the renewal of sales of oil, and we did this. And as I understand, it's still necessary at the renewal of this export to regulate some legal issues and issues of property. It's been done by the Parliament of Libya. Now, as for the influence of this process on world oil markets and the prices, energy prices, well, I guess it influences somehow. Now we see that the oil price is going a bit up. When we say about the necessity to regulate the oil market, we do not mean that there is a necessity to discriminate one or other producer of hydrocarbons. So, next question from NTV channel. Dina Ivanova, you have the floor. No, we don't have Madam Ivanova. And now we're going to RBK. Polina Himshashvili, please, you have the floor. Polina, are you with us? Yes. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mr. Lavrov. Can we go back to the Nagorno Karabakh issue? Can you please provide some details on the status of territories that are now under Armenian control, Stepanakert and other territories? Would the status of these territories be discussed later, taking into account that Azerbaijan says that the Karabakh question is being resolved now? Thank you. I've already touched upon this question. Now the question of the status of Nagorno Karabakh is the main topic of the political process, because the process of restoring the control of Azerbaijan over 5 and then 2 other regions is ongoing. Azerbaijan creates some temporary administrations there, will be restoring peaceful life and coexistence there. It will be also necessary to resolve the issue of the return of IDPs from the regions where it happened during the hostilities and afterwards. And Nagorno-Karabakh, its status was not being defined. This was mentioned by President Aliyev. We think that this status now will be defined depending on what actions we need to make in order to help restore ethnic and religious coexistence and accord as it was before the war that resulted in harsh consequences that we are now working with now. It will be possible to define the status only when it will be clear what rights will be granted to those who lived in Nagorno-Karabakh and has the right to go back there and who continue to be on the territory. I mean, Armenians, Azeris, and others. I already mentioned the issue of cultural patrimony and the issue of shrines, and that it's imperative to restore ethnical peace and interreligious peace, and it's necessary to restore everyday life as it used to be when representatives of all the ethnic and religious groups used to live there side by side peacefully. So it's necessary to do this, and it will not be a correct thing to set up some artificial timeline. We see that Azeri refugees will have the opportunity to go back to the south of Nagorno-Karabakh, to the district of Shushi, and our peacekeepers will guarantee security and calm situation there. Our Azeri and Armenian colleagues are also interested in this, and we will work with UNESCO in order to restore the symbols of cultural patrimony and to have respect towards them. We'll also work with the ICRC and UNHCR, and so that people could go back to their homes and so that they will be able to restore their peaceful life when it happens. I have no doubt that the question of status would lose its importance and could be settled rapidly and steadily. So our conference lasts for 1 hour 20 minutes. We have 3 more journalists. They're from foreign media. Benoit Vitkin from Le Monde. Please, you have the floor. Good afternoon, Mr. Lavrov. My colleagues have already touched upon that issue about the role of Turkey. Do you think that you explain that Minsk group is playing a leading role in the settlement of the conflict? Do you think that Ankara may be added up to the co-chairs of this group? No, it's not being added as a co-chair, and you were right in saying that Minsk group is still there. It comprises of around 10 countries, Turkey among them, and Minsk group is in charge of Nagorno-Karabakh. It considers the reports of co-chairs, and each and every member of Minsk group has full right to express its point of view or make some suggestions, and co-chairs, as they should, they have to take into account the position of the members of the group, because they are co-chairs of that group. They have the responsibility provided by this group. There are no plans to extend the configuration of the Troika. Russia, USA, and the USA and France. Yesterday I had a conversation with Jean-Yves Le Drian and employees of our foreign ministry in constant contact with our American colleagues. And next week we are waiting for the co-chairs to visit Moscow, and we'll be able to inform them in details on how we deploy our peacekeeping forces, and we'll be discussing just what I mentioned recently: how do we restore the peaceful everyday life, taking into account the rights of all ethnic and religious groups in Nagorno-Karabakh and around this region.
DPA Information Agency, Ulf Mulder. Good day. Do you hear me? Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Good day, Mr. Minister. A question on Russian-German relations. You've already covered it a little bit. I'd like to know, to what extent does this confrontation that we witness affect the political process? We see that Germans are not happy about the fact that they don't get any replies from Moscow on the Tiergarten case, and Moscow is not happy about not receiving replies on the Navalny case. How does this complicate the political process, and does it affect, for example, the situation in Ukraine, talks within the Normandy format, and maybe some other issues, for instance, opening of border between Russia and the EU? And will there be any response to the sanctions from the EU and Germany? And do you believe that Nord Stream would be finalized? Oh, you have quite a long list of questions. As for the Tiergarten case, I don't understand why Germans are not happy. There is an ongoing investigation, and legal advisors are working on that case currently. I think they are questioning witnesses. So there's an ongoing judicial processes, and I haven't seen any requests by Russia. So there is a certain person that is accused of a crime. There were no proof that he is related in some way to Russia. There were some accusations voiced, but they should be substantiated by those who launched these accusations. And once again, let me repeat that this individual has a lawyer, and so far we haven't got a reply to a question with regard to what witnesses have seen and what they haven't seen. As for the Navalny case, there are serious grounds for misunderstanding and concern, and there is a ground to claim that German actions are unacceptable and they do not fit their international commitments. I would not go into detail. This case has been covered at length both during our briefings and in media reports. But the thing is that despite all the outcries, Navalny was presented to German doctors in less than 24 hours once we got permission to transport him. And immediately we gave a green light to the German flight. Well, it is interesting to discuss some other aspects of the German flight, but I believe that this will not be a discussion about medical issues, but rather about who can be involved in this case apart from the medical community. So immediately he was transferred to the Charité hospital, and this hospital found no traces of nerve agents. And the nerve agent was identified in samples in Bundeswehr hospital, and when we asked them to give us the results, they denied us. And do you think that this is a serious discussion? Well, it's maybe not some kind of a kids talk, but maybe it's a serious provocation and unwillingness to present us with some evidence that is set in stone. We made several requests under the Convention on Assistance, Mutual Assistance on Legal Cases, under which Germans had to provide us what they identified in Navalny samples. And they said that they will be ready to give us these results, or just to give a thought about giving you these results once you initiate a criminal case. And how can we initiate a criminal case if the Omsk hospital found no trace of this criminal case? So I believe that it is not ethical not to abide by their obligations for either Germany or any other country, no matter what it thinks of itself. But Germans believe that they are sinless. Their words should be taken for at face value. And they said that it is not about bilateral relations, it's a matter of international security. That is why Germans provided some details to the OPCW, and they advised us to ask the OPCW. So we asked them, and initially they refused that they had some information. After that, they said that they went to Berlin, they did the necessary procedures, they made a report, and after we asked them to give the report, and they said, you know, it was ordered by Berlin, so please ask Berlin. Berlin says, go to The Hague, and The Hague says, go to Berlin. Do you think that it is polite in diplomatic or human terms? I believe it is not. And the report that was drafted in the OPCW in The Hague was circulated by all the chemical formulas, and devil is in these formulas. They were underscored, and they were put in black. So I called Heiko Maas, and I said that it is unacceptable for Berlin not to show us the results, and at the same time Berlin accuses us of all deadly sins. And by the way, Germany and France were the instigators of launching discussions about anti-Russian sanctions within the EU. Because of the case that was not proved by anyone and anywhere. Allegedly, this crime happened in the territory of Russia, but we have all the grounds to believe that everything that has to do with traces of chemical agents in his blood samples, it all happened either in Germany or during the flight. I believe that Mr. Navalny feels quite well, just like the Skripals. Well, although nobody saw them, we are not granted consular access to them. But you know, back in the day, in the beginning, the whole world stated that he was drinking some tea in the Omsk airport, and after that he was poisoned. We checked all this and we found no traces whatsoever. After that, his staff, members of his team, they stole some evidence, bottles from his suit, and they penetrated it illegally, by the way. And we are told that some irrefutable evidence was found in these bottles. And all of a sudden, Navalny says that it's not about bottles and tea, it's about his clothes, and he was poisoned via his clothes. Well, I think this is just not serious. And it's hard for me to understand the real rationale behind actions of our German partners, and I've already told to Heiko Maas, and it's an open secret, that Germany plays the leading role in this new wave of exacerbating tensions with Russia, and we're concerned about this. We're concerned about the global role that Germany plays in Europe, that it played in Europe, and that it tries to further play in Europe. If I may... Oh, and you mentioned Ukraine. We have a lot of claims against our partners in Germany and France. hiding behind the 5 principles of the EU and stating that everything will be well if Russia abides by the Minsk agreements. I believe that this is not made in bona fide. And the statements made by Ukraine should receive some feedback by Germany and France, since they are members of the Normandy format. And as for the statements, Zelensky says that first a control should be installed, and after that we will deal with this business without any arrangements. Mr. Zelensky and his vice president says that these agreements have been outdated and they should be reviewed. Mr. Kravchuk, chief negotiator within the contact group, that should be the leading negotiating body, so he circulated recently some kind of a new initiative that was portrayed by our negotiators as the initiative that undermines the Minsk agreements, that has one goal in mind: do nothing but have another N4 summit, because at this summit it is a real pleasure for Mr. Zelensky to talk to the European leaders and maybe to make some impression among his voters and EU leaders that he can apparently do something. But we've already gone through this stage. It was the case with Mr. Poroshenko and with President Zelensky, and there's been no change whatsoever. So instead of conniving this approach of undermining the Minsk agreements, Berlin and Paris should raise their voice and urge Zelensky and his team to observe what has been stated almost a year ago at the Paris summit, that there is no alternative to the Minsk agreements, and unless it is done, we will consider that Berlin and France facilitate the destruction of the arrangements that they facilitated initially. This was the second betrayal. First time it was in February 2014 when Berlin, Paris and Warsaw signed up to the protocol on the settlement between President Yanukovych and the opposition, and the very next day opposition withdrew from this agreement, and the EU representatives just did nothing with that situation, and they recognized the illegitimate coup d'etat through an armed and unconstitutional grab of power. And after that, they accused Russia of not recognizing this illegitimate coup d'etat. I believe it's not a mistake or a blunder. It's a treason against international law that was in the making by Germany and France. And another case of betrayal happens with regard to undermining the Minsk agreements. First, it was the arrangement of February 2014, and later on the arrangement of February 2015. Once a year, our colleagues from France and Germany made and signed agreements that they wanted to bury afterwards. And you also had a question about some border between Russia and the EU. I don't know exactly what you're talking about. We had negotiations on the visa-free regime. They lasted for quite some time. There were several stages, the latest of which was in 2013, I believe. It related to simplifying the visa regime, including visa-free mode for citizens involved in sporting, educational, cultural exchanges. But unfortunately, this document failed to come in force. Mr. Barroso had some ideas in that regard. They had some preconditions that this regime should cover only holders of biometric passports, and we agreed to that. After that, they said that prior to entry into force, we need to sign a readmission protocol so that violators shall be deported. And we agreed to that as well, but they didn't help. They didn't want to sign any new agreements on making the border more transferable, more penetrable. So this agreement didn't happen, and ultimately it was not about EU concerns about readmission and biometric passports. At some stage, they were frank with us. They said, indeed, you are ready for the visa-free regime. But the EU has a political decision that it will be unacceptable to grant Russia a visa-free regime before granting visa-free regime to Belarus, Georgia and Moldova. Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova, I beg your pardon. And that's what they stated us. Back in the day, neither Ukraine nor Georgia nor Moldova made even closer to the stage of the visa-free regime. So this is the cost of statements about the strategic partnership and the East Asian partnership, that it has no anti-Russian tune to that. Indeed, it had this anti-Russian sentiment, and everything that could be done for the benefit of civil societies and other contexts. They said that first they will develop these ties with these countries, although Russia is more ready to that than these countries. With regard to the sanctions, well, I take a lot of time answering your question because you had a plethora of questions. Of course, we will reciprocate the sanctions, and since the Navalny case highlighted that it was Germany that was the driving force behind sanctions, and since they imposed sanctions against the office of the president, we will mirror and reciprocate these sanctions. And we've already briefed our German colleagues that this will be sanctions against the leading administration of Germany and France. And let's get down to the recapping, to the final question. NBC TV channel. Good day, Mr. Minister. You've already answered the question on the US election, and I thank you for that. And I would like to ask a question on strategic partnership. Besides the New START treaty, what other questions does Russia expect to discuss with the new US administration? Well, we had a myriad of proposals. You know, when President Trump entered his office, he said that he wants to establish good relations with Russia. I visited the White House twice, and I was received by President Trump in 2016 and in 2019, and each and every time I felt that he's genuinely interested in working with Russia on a win-win basis, building upon national interests of national security of both the US and Russia, and we welcomed this commitment. But actually, apparently it did not define actions of the US at other stages. As already said, we already had some 50 rounds of sanctions that never happened before during the previous administrations. Even when previous leaders were not so positive about their desire to establish relations with Russia. Well, we're not offended, we're not insulted, and we build our relations with one of these superpowers of the world, judging from pragmatism and the real politics requires us to maintain a dialogue with the US on strategic stability. That's the most important thing. And we need to preserve this dialogue in such a way as to prevent the dismantling of other strategic security arrangements and for the benefit of all other peoples of the world.
Over the last years, on each irrigating pretext that was created as a rule from Washington, we tried to respond constructively. When President Obama invented the topic of Russian meddling into 2016 US elections, we proposed to use the special channel, closed channel of communications that existed through centers on lowering nuclear danger. There is a good closed line of communication in those centers, and when they said that through our hackers and others we are interfering into digital space of the United States in order to manipulate the results of the elections, to hack the server of Democratic Party, we immediately proposed to use this channel of communications so that the Americans, through this channel, Americans could send all their concerns and we will be able to respond to all of their concerns. We sent those requests several times and they said no each and every time, and during the Trump administration, when we got back to that issue, when they began to say that Russia meddled into US elections and hasn't reacted in any way to American concerns, we said, let's be honest and publish all the notes that we exchanged over the last years through this closed line of communication, and we proposed to start an honest dialogue so that you would be able to send some specific concerns, that we will be able to address them. You said no, they didn't want to publish this, but of course we mentioned the fact of such negotiations. Then several other problems appeared, like the agreements on INF Treaty and disarmament issue. The United States, under the completely invented pretext, blamed us on the development of the missile that was tested on prohibited distance. They withdrew from the treaty. Our proposal to get an inspection of this site was rejected. Not only the Americans sent their specialists, they also prohibited the NATO members to accept this invitation. Only Greece, Turkey and Bulgaria sent their military attaché, and over a few hours they examined this missile, make questions to our specialists and get some answers. Of course, those countries, Greece, Turkey and Bulgaria, maybe they do not have the specialists of the level that the United States has. Specialists who could make some more competent professional questions about the specifics and peculiarities of this missile. So the United States rejected and didn't want to send their experts. They withdrew from the treaty, and soon it became obvious why did they do this. Because they wanted to deploy the missiles prohibited by this treaty long before they announced the termination of this treaty. Now you see in Japan and in South Korea, they begin to deploy those missiles to those countries, and the anti-missiles facilities that are in Romania now and will be in Poland, so-called MK-41, those facilities began to be used for the launch of cruise missiles. While we were mentioning this fact over the last years, that we are concerned about this. They said, no, Mk-41 is only anti-missile facilities. They will be launching anti-missiles. But I guess it produced by the Lockheed Martin Corporation, and on this website there is an ad that says the deployment of Mk-41 is a dual-use platform. It can launch anti-missiles and cruise missiles, strike cruise missiles, for the deployment of the middle-range and long-distance rockets that were prohibited through the INF. After the termination of this treaty, they tested this site with cruise missile. So when they said that we are guilty of violating the INF treaty, that's why they withdrew. It's a false statement. They needed these missiles in Asia, especially. As for the current situation with this category of arms, you know that President Putin a year ago sent a proposal to all of his partners, and among them were NATO countries, on how to overcome the crisis because of the termination of the INF, about the moratorium on deploying medium-range and long-range missiles until there are systems of the American production. He proposed to make this moratorium reciprocal, and he underlined that we will be ready to discuss verification measures. This proposal was ignored. Only France expressed their interest in beginning to discuss such a moratorium and the ways of its verification, because that was the key, because we need mutual confidence. All the others said, no, Russia already has this missile, it violates everything, and Russia doesn't want us to have the same type. That's why Russia proposes this moratorium. Well, we continue our work, and we still think that it will be really a great threat to deploy such missiles in Europe and in Asia. Well, in Europe first and foremost, although being in Asia, they would still be able to reach a significant part of our territory, even if they will be there only to contain China, as they say. Well, we proposed new initiative that was done by our president on these type of missiles. He proposed to go back to joint mutual moratorium with specific settlement of confidence issue through verification process, taking into account that, well, Americans and NATO have Mk-41s in Romania and Poland that are able to launch and strike cruise missiles, and we have a site missile 9M729, which, as you say, violates the range stipulated by the treaty. Let's have a reciprocal inspection missions, and moreover, we will be ready, even if we would not be able to convince you that this type of missile 9M729 doesn't have a range more than 500 kilometers. We'll be ready not only to withdraw it from Kaliningrad Oblast, we'll be ready to withdraw it from the European part of the Russian territory. Isn't it an honest proposal? Well, till the moment we haven't seen any clear reaction, and that's why we think and we see that the Americans do not need any control over these arms. They just need some uncontrolled deployment of the arms that they need in order to contain Russia, China, or whomever it may be. Other proposal that was mentioned about the cyber affairs recently, because of this hysteria in the United States about the meddling in everything by everyone through cyberspace, we adding up to the initiatives that we are promoting in the United Nations about the necessity to ensure international digital and cybersecurity, so that the cyberspace and internet as its major part will be controlled not by one actor. This control needs to be collective, so that all the countries could understand how does the internet operate, so that national security of any country would not be infringed. We are continuing this work in the United Nations. Not everyone likes it. Our American colleagues are trying to freeze it, but the decision adopted by the General Assembly recently stipulates that this work will be continued about the rules of responsible behavior of all the countries in the cyberspace. But at the same time, we proposed the Americans, there was an initiative by President Putin. We proposed to reactivate and revitalize our work on the cyberspace, and the working group that existed really successfully, and to have other measures that will lead us to decrease the tension in cyberspace through transparency, dialogue, and rejection of foundless accusations that didn't let us to have any meaningful dialogue. We have many initiatives in order to be able to solve issues related to global security, which is now being tested more and more intensively. Now they are withdrawing from the Open Skies Treaty, and this treaty says that the data that are being obtained through this overflight and these flights should be given to other participants of that treaty. So non-participants will not have this data. And we know that the Americans are now actively working with NATO member countries and with all of their partners who are still members of the treaty. They are demanding to sign some documents that when they will be there without the United States in that treaty, so that these Western countries, the data that they will have from the Russian Federation, this data would be given to the United States. Is it decent? I don't think so. So we don't want to show anything to anyone, but we will be illegally asking our allies to provide us with this information, although this information, according to the treaty, are prohibited to go to the United States. And at the same time, they say that in the case the treaty continues to exist, when Russia will be asking for flights over Europe and other Western countries that would still be members of this treaty, they want these countries to prohibit the flights over military facilities of the United States in those countries. That's yet another flagrant violation of the treaty. And we know this, that Americans are pushing their partners to have these demands towards us. Of course, we will continue our work, and if this treaty continues to exist, and if we want to still make part of this treaty, will be asking our partners to legally confirm that they will not prohibit and ban flights over any part of their territory, whether this territory has or not, or doesn't have any military bases of the United States, because this territory is still part of the treaty. And second, that they will not transfer data about the flights over the Russian territory to the United States. That's yet another major topic. And going back to New START, if it expires, we will do not have any treaty for the arms control and for ensuring transparent conditions for strategic stability. Yes, Americans, well, we are ready to have dialogue on all the new types of arms, including those types that were announced by President Putin 2 years ago, which are now being actively developed and worked on, are already entering the military preparedness with Armata and Avangard systems. We said that they are under the Strategic and Offensive Arms Treaty. We will be ready to count those arms into the treaty, and Poseidon, Burevestnik systems and other systems will not be abided by this treaty. That's why for them, in order to discuss these types of arms, we need another framework and another discussions. That's what we propose to do, to start those discussions, but not only just discussing what Americans say. Give us the number of your warheads, so we will have an information what you have, what situation you have with the strategic offensive nuclear arms. Well, warheads is a secondary issue. Primary issue are delivery means. And what we propose to our American colleagues is to examine the new situation and to analyze our new types of arms, Americans' arms, and to analyze the doctrines that are being developed in our countries and that suppose the use of military doctrines and the cases for the use of such doctrines. The United States, in their doctrines, has lowered the level of the use of such arms, and they are now creating low capability warheads as the battlefield weapons. This is extremely dangerous, and they see cyberspace and the outer space as potential battlegrounds. We have to discuss this. This is really much more important than the number of tactical warheads, because warhead in itself has no meaning, no practical meaning. It only has one when there are delivery means and the doctrines that could activate such delivery mean. If the United States wants to treat honestly those issues and the level field play, we hope that under any administration in the White House, it will understand its responsibility on the strategic issues in order to avoid such unpleasant trends like the undermining of everything and inability to create something new that will be as comprehensive as previous treaties. And of course, we know the obsession of the United States to involve China into these negotiations. We, of course, are pleased with this, but we fully respect the position of Chinese People's Republic, and they said that their potentials cannot be compared. Their potential cannot be compared with the potentials of the United States and the Russian Federation. So now they cannot and will not participate in any kind of negotiations, although some kinds of consultations are ongoing. I mean, between China and the United States, we too have different consultations. But if we speak about some negotiations, and if the United States are convinced that it's impossible to create anything new without China, well, then the United States should convince China on the necessity to do this. We fully respecting its position, we will not do this for the United States. But if those negotiations are to be multilateral, then this configuration should, of course, involve Great Britain and France. When we mentioned this, they said, well, no, it's other case. They are our allies, and China is our common threat. What kind of logic is it? Well, yes, they are allies of the United States, but that's why it is even more important to take into account their potential. For example, France is now testing new missiles, new submarines. They are allies of the United States. They abide by the 5th article of the Washington Treaty. How can they say, well, because they are our friends, we will put them aside? Well, it's a not polite thing to do, I guess, and it will not work out. So, as you see, I was speaking in such a detail because we have a lot of constructive proposals, and we are still waiting for the reaction from any administration, whatever kind of administration would there be, in the White House on the 20th of January. Dear colleagues, 2 hours was the duration of our press conference. Thank you so much for your participation. That's the end of our press conference. Thank you so much. Have a good day, dear colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Lavrov. Thank you. Goodbye.